Welcome to this episode of the Cold Dead Hands podcast with your hosts, Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow and resident firebrand Brett Cross. Sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy as they bring you the stories told from the cold dead hands.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Stories from the Cold Dead Hands, where we bring you the stories of victims and their families of events that are tragedies in the modern American situation. I'm Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow. I am a gun scholar, having published numerous publications on guns, mental health, and the reasons that people want to own guns or support gun policies. My co-host here, I'll let him introduce himself.
I'm Brett Cross. I'm the father of the Robb Elementary massacre victim, Uzziah Garcia. And since then, I have been fighting to keep his name and his memory in the public eye so that nobody forgets about the victims of these tragedies. So often the perpetrators of these acts are the ones that get the media attention. And so we speak on Uzziah so that he is not just a statistic, that he is remembered as the loving, amazing child that he was.
And that is the point of this radio show, is to bring those stories, to keep alive the people who were taken from us suddenly. And that brings us to tonight's episode. I'd like to introduce our guests, Sheila Foster and Whitney Mitchell. Sheila, if you'd like to introduce yourself briefly.
My name is Sheila Foster. I'm Garrett Foster's mother. Garrett was taken from us in 2020.
Okay, Whitney.
I'm Whitney Mitchell. Garrett was my husband. I was with him for 10, almost 11 years since we were 17 years old. So, yes.
So tonight we're going to talk about Garrett and who Garrett was as a person, what he was like, what he was interested in, the things that, Whitney, you and he like to do together as we build towards the event that took him from us. And then we'll talk about that. So who wants to start? Who wants to talk about what he was like as a person?
I could start at childhood, from a young age.
Yes,
He
ma'am.
loved animals, bugs, reptiles. I think his first pet was an iguana that someone gave us, and he loved that lizard. And then when he was 5, I got him a bird for his 5th birthday, and he named it Rock and Roll Bird because it used to bob its head to the music. And he loved that bird, and that stayed with him throughout his teenage years. He always had a snake. There was always a snake in the house, and multiple baby ducks that he would bring home from the creek, just to take care of these abandoned animals. He was fascinated with praying mantises and ant lions. I don't know if you know what those are, but he used to sit for hours and play with the ant lions. He just loved all those things that most of us don't. Most of us are like, ew. Garrett loved them.
I mean, I stay away from snakes personally. That's just me.
Same. I don't mess with snakes. Not at all. Nope.
Not at all. I mean, that brings us Whitney, you said you met Garrett when you were 17.
Yeah, we were both 17, and I met him through a friend, and I pretty much started talking to him on the phone for hours, every day till the sun came up. And then he ended up asking me out of the phone, and then we eventually got to meet up in person, and I don't know, it was just an instant connection, and he was just very much like a silly and fun person, and he was a prankster for sure. And every time I was with him, I always felt like we were teenagers until the time that he died. Like we also have like a lizard, like like an Argentinian tegu that I still have, and his name is Beetlejuice, which he loved very dearly. And he also used to have a snake named Little Rick. And like he used to just walk around the house like cooking and like playing video games with the snake wrapped around his head. And then he would like we would take Beetlejuice like home for Christmas and we would go see Sheila and he would just have like Beetlejuice like on his chest as he was sleeping and he would fall asleep with like Beetlejuice and he was just very much like the most incredible person I've ever been with in my life. He was my first boyfriend. He was my first everything. And it always felt like a movie when I was with him. So yeah, he's my best friend.
I get that. I get that. I not sure how I would do with the snake. I can deal with the lizard. The lizard's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I can't mess with either of them. You said that he was a prankster. Sheila, is there any like pranks from when he was real young that you remember?
I don't remember any pranks from when he was real young. I don't think those really started till he was a teenager. But he had the same group of friends. He started meeting them in second grade,
Mm.
and he kept those guys. You know, they were kind of like brothers. And one of them, Stefan, would go to their house and play Warhammer table game.
Yes, ma'am.
Um, I don't know how often they did that. Whitney, do you know?
No, he was still playing Warhammer like with his friends. They would come over and they would have beers and like play Warhammer often.
He's very, very kind of nerdy and goofy and big movie buff. And he was all of his friends. It was like this multicolored quilt of people who were they covered him, you know, his whole childhood and teenage years. And then when he met Whitney and fell in love, I have never seen him as happy as he was during that time. And you could look at my son and tell that he was in love, and he was so happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't mention like I lost like all four of my limbs when I was 18 years old. And Garrett like stayed after like just stayed with me through all of it, was at the hospital every single day. And every time I opened my eyes, he was there. I went through a lot of medical, just it was a lot of trauma and just like, and he was just always like cleaning me up. And I remember when I was struggling to breathe, he would put this tube in my mouth and make sure like I was like I guess like a spitting tube, and he would make sure that I could breathe, and he would talk to me, and I couldn't talk at the time, and he would just be talking to me and like talking me through everything. And he stayed there every single day. When all my friends were gone, he was the only person there. Like he was with me when I tried to relearn how to walk. He just like that was like one of the worst times of my life. Like I didn't know what I was gonna do, and he was just there every single day with me every step of the way. Even when he was in the Air Force, he called me every night. He made sure I was taken care of. He always put me before himself. He always did that all the time.
Yeah, it
So
sounds
he had
like
a beautiful heart.
so how he joined the Air Force. How old was he when he joined?
He was 17 or 18. It was 2000. Gosh, I'm losing my mind. It was like 2010, the year he graduated from high school. He enlisted straight out of high school. And he was actually born on an Air Force base. He was born at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi
Okay.
because his father was stationed there at the time for training. And that was an ordeal. I don't recommend having a baby on an Air Force base. They don't give you pain medication or anything. He was completely 100% natural birth. And it was kind of a family thing. You know, everybody or every generation of our family had somebody serve in this military. And he was kind of following in those same footsteps.
How long
And
did
Whitney, I'm sorry,
how long did he serve?
just 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah, he wanted to get out early. He couldn't stand being away from Whitney. It was so hard on both of them for him to be away. And she stayed with her mother, and her mother took care of her, and she was being taken care of. But he just loved her so much he couldn't stand being away from her.
Yeah.
They had a beautiful love.
Yeah, I think everybody's kind of getting that. I think we can feel that that it was something very special, something very raw, something very real, which makes everything that comes after harder, right? When we eventually get there. So after he left the Air Force, what was life like?
He went straight to Whitney. He was always with Whitney. They moved into a high-rise apartment in downtown Dallas, and that's when she started sewing. You started sewing costumes, designing and
Yeah.
sewing costumes.
Yeah, he was a big part of that, because I started sewing when I got out of the hospital, and he had been like supporting me all the time with it. I mean, I like he would help me film, go with shop with me for the fabrics, help me get all the materials for it. And I ended up making a dress for this TV show called The Good Place. And every day I had to go in for like 3 months and make this dress, and he was helping me like sew it and like pinning it for me, and just like he helped me through like everything I was doing when I was making dresses, and he was a huge part of it. I wouldn't be able to have done that if he wasn't with me, and he just dedicated all of his time, to like making sure that like the dream that I had, like for it to come true. Yeah, uh, just very much like always a giving person, even more, even when I wanted him to always put himself, first. I just I can't really express how much, um, in words I'm trying to. Just there's nobody like him.
I even at one point, I've told Whitney this before, so it's not cold and callous for me to say this, I don't think. But at one point, I even told Garrett after they moved to Austin, I said, Garrett, you could take classes at UT and go into political science, because he was so big on his libertarian beliefs, and what he stood for. And he was very vocal about how he felt about politics and police overreach and abuse of power, and government overreach and abuse of power. And I told him, I said, I could see you doing something with that in your life. And he said, I'm not going to do that, Mom. I said, honey, you could hire somebody to come and make sure Whitney's okay while you take classes. And he said, no, I'm not going to hire anybody to take care of Whitney. He said, I'm not trusting anybody else to take care of Whitney. And he just was so adamantly against somebody else coming in and taking care of Whitney. He wanted to be the one to do it. It wasn't a burden to him. She was the love of his life. And that's where he wanted to be. So it's
Yeah.
an amazing, amazing person.
Yeah, I think we can all kind of feel that, right? So you started making costumes, Whitney. He was helping, you with your needs. We start, moving forward in time a little bit. You've moved to Austin at this point. What was life like there?
Like we moved there at the end of 2019, and it was really exciting because it was like our first house, and we were like decorating it, and just like we kind of spent most of our nights like, like we were very much like going to the movies because we were big movie people, like it was kind of just like, I don't know if you can imagine, just like how I can describe it. It's like it just felt like we were basically like still 17 years old, like, but just like living in a house. Like we stayed up really late together. We were like night owls. Like we'd be like watching movies and eating junk food together and like going and exploring different places in Austin. We would take different trips together and just like pretty much just like living our life to the fullest in the best way that we could.
I would assume the Austin movie house was like a favorite then. The
Yeah. I feel like that was also one of the reasons why we moved to Austin because we liked going to the movie festivals too. And I just something that I really, really miss like doing that with him. And it's just that's the only way I can describe it. It's just like it just still felt like we were just still like 17 years old, just living in a house and like it just if that makes sense.
what was
They
his
would
favorite?
drive all the way to Dallas. I live up northeast of Dallas. I did not mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No,
But they would drive all the way here just to watch a movie with me. If Garrett saw a movie that he knew I'd love, he wanted to be with me when I watched it. And he would, while we were watching the movie, he was watching me because he wanted to see my reaction to the things that he knew I would love. And I don't know a whole lot of people that'll drive 4 hours to watch a movie with somebody for an hour and a half. You know, but me and Garrett had a bond.
well, I was going to ask, so I'll ask now. What was his favorite movie? Like what, or what was genre? What was his favorites? The things he
God.
watched over and over.
He loved the Avengers. He loved the Marvel movies, and he loved Killer Joe. Weird. He had a weird, twisted sense of humor. I don't know if you've ever seen Killer Joe with Matthew McConaughey.
I have not seen that one, but
Westworld. Loved
Westworld. Yeah. He also loved
Westworld.
Band of Brothers. He watched a lot of World War II. Um, shows
Uh,
movies like Saving Private Ryan.
loved Saving.
Yeah. He's very, very like into like a big like is it like World War II buff? Like he was really, really into that. I miss him talking about like I'm sorry, I'm just having a specific memory. I think when we were in Austin, I remember we both went to the Alamo Draft House to go watch Saving Private Ryan on Memorial Day. Um, so yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Sheila.
No, you're fine. Yeah, he loved movies, and if you're telling me to pick a favorite, I can't. He had so many. Me and his youngest sister, Katie, we went there in May of 2020, and COVID had everything shut down. So we spent the entire weekend in the house with Garrett and Whitney. You know, we went and picked up food or had food delivered, and we sat on their couch and watched movies, watched back-to-back episodes of Westworld and Killer Joe. And I don't remember what else we watched that weekend, but
Yeah.
that was one of the weird things that we had in common and shared was our love for movies.
Yeah.
we moved towards COVID, right? So now we're approaching the event. Pandemic happens. The protests related to George Floyd happen. So Black Lives Matter protests are happening all over the nation. So Whitney, would you like to tell this part of the story?
Oh yeah. I mean, me and Garrett had been having these conversations for a while, and he was very like vocal and active on that. Like he constantly talked about it, like in debates online about like, he was very, very adamant about speaking up for it and just with everything with us being together, like there's things that he'd seen and he had like an understanding of when we would talk about it. And we saw that there's like a protest happening. So we just decided, hey, let's go. Let's just go out to this protest, and I like make our voices heard. That's, we can do that. And so we just decided to just go to these protests, and we kept going like pretty much every day. And there's a point where across the street, like from the Austin Police Department, there were people who were unhoused, and they were also protesting with us. And I remember like me and Garrett and our roommate at the time, like we were like all talking about how like, like we should like feed people who are unhoused, because they're protesting with us, and and nobody's doing anything. So we pretty much like bought all this food, and like we tried to find all these different restaurants that had food they weren't using, and then like started cooking them at our house. And then like we bought a table set up and bought all of like, we bought like clothing and things like that people would need, and we would just go um under that bridge, like which is across from the Austin Police Department, and just start like giving out food um after the protest. It would be like either sometimes before a protest or after. So we started adamantly doing that, and we were going to call it Austin Direct Action. And that's something that we wanted to do, because we wanted to do like mutual aid, because like we're protesting out here for Black lives, so we could also be like feeding unhoused people, and so that's something that we were doing like every day. And at the protest, things like there's a lot of just a lot going on, like people getting it's like beanbags shot at them. Like I forgot what it's called, like where they throw like it's
Tear
like
gas.
gas, tear gas, all types of things, people being thrown to the ground just for, we're marching, or just for like something just standing there, and we continually saw that. And there was like a night where our roommate like got arrested and thrown to the ground, and then like they were in jail for I think about 2 days. And so Garrett like wanted to like open carry like as like a deterrent, like to open carry, because previously there had been someone in a car that had like drove and tried to run over us the first time, and he had a gun and he pulled it out and he threatened everybody with it, and the police just like let him drive through the garage and just like let him go. They didn't do anything, they just let him go after that happened. So like that event, and then after a roommate got arrested, it's kind of just all of the things I'm talking about is why Garrett started carrying, just so people wouldn't do things like that, like driving through the crowd and like coming up and having guns, and just, if that makes sense. And like that's why he was carrying it. And like people they would ask him about the gun, and like he would like explain why he was carrying it, and then like people like felt protected, and yeah, I just feel like, yeah, so much of it has been made of him carrying that gun, when it's just like people were not there at those
But
protests and seeing what
it,
we were seeing.
it's legal in the state of Texas, right? Open
Yeah,
legal in the state of Texas. And, it's legal to carry without any kind of concealed carry license or anything now. Like, I don't know if that law was in place at this time when Garrett is carrying, but like today in Texas, you do not even have to have any kind of registrations or license to
Mhm.
carry concealed or open in the state.
Mhm.
Um, was that so unusual though? Were there not many people there at those protests with weapons?
Garrett was the first person who open carried, and then the day of that everything happened, then there were a group of people that started to carry, and he had just met them that day, which is that's also what's frustrating, is that people were like, no, he was with the whole group. It's like, no, like he just had met these other people that decided to open carry that day. And so like he was the only at that time to do that. And so
How many of the protests did he go to armed?
where he was, can you repeat it? I'm so sorry.
Yeah. How many of the protests had he attended at that point up until the event where he had a gun open carry?
I'm pretty sure it was like 50 days. Like he wasn't even carrying it for the days that we were out, because it was the end of May. into July, and that was like he didn't start carrying it until like the middle of July. So like we had been like at those protests and he wasn't carrying for quite a while. So it's just that things started escalating and escalating. So yeah.
So
He thought
week, maybe 2 weeks.
Mhm.
he told me he thought it would be a deterrent for these people that were trying to harm these protesters. And there were lots of people that were trying to harm the protesters. I don't know if you're aware that there were 50 instances in the summer of 2020 where people tried to run over the protesters.
And sadly, that was national, right?
Right into their crowd.
We saw that happen all over the country, right? So I completely understand where Garrett is coming from in this situation, right? I don't think Brett would disagree, or I would disagree, or many of our listeners would disagree that that we can understand whether or not we would do it or not is a different story, but we can understand why he would want to do it.
Mhm.
Garrett was the good guy with the gun. You hear people make that argument all the time. The only person that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And the guy was my son. He was trying to protect people.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I have my own thoughts about the good guy with a gun, and we can go into that in the second segment. But so it's mid-July and you're going to these protests, but Garrett's now carrying openly. And people were tense, obviously, because you said that they were asking questions about why he had the gun.
I mean, yeah, I mean, because it's like, of course, like everyone's at the protest for Black Lives Matter, and like we all had conversations, like because like that's the thing, like when people describe these protests, a lot of the like because they started to die down, so sometimes it was just like 10 of us just sitting, like just standing out there, and we're holding signs and we're talking and having discussions, and so like people would talk with him, and like I don't know, I don't think people realize that's what a lot of those protests were too. And they would just ask him like, "What are you carrying?" Like what, like just I remember like him talking to different protesters, just having conversations about it. But and I feel like towards the end, like people started to understand and they started to feel safer with him there and with all the stuff that we had seen for a while, especially, like I said, with the incident of the guy, like before driving into the crowd and had a gun and was like waving it and threatening to shoot people, and that, yeah. So
Yeah. And,
Now
and,
that
and go ahead, Brett.
so that incident, and if I'm jumping ahead, I apologize, but that incident that you're talking about with the guy driving into the crowd, is that the same video that you've shared, Sheila, or is that a different incident?
Oh, so I know of two that
Mm,
Garrett specifically told me about. One of them was a guy in a blue truck.
mm,
The other one, I actually know his name. I'm not going to say it, but he was driving a white car right in front of the police station. He was pointing out the window at protesters,
yeah,
and he got questioned and released. And
yeah.
there's no consequences when
Mhm,
people were threatening the protesters. The police hated the protesters.
mhm.
Yep. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah, the police are not kind to the protesters, right? Like they're annoyed by them. They get mad when the streets get shut down, or when, some of the chants that as someone who's attended several of these protests, right? Like the chants that call them pigs, or reference bacon or anything else, right? Those things annoy them, makes them less willing to do their job, right? Um,
Well, these people were not just apathetic about their job and the oaths that they took, they were literally assaulting people
yeah,
just for what people were saying.
Yeah.
And This power trip, it's ego, it's
I mean, there is a
assaulting the
reason.
people that
There's a
are
reason
paying
people
for
say
the salary. Assaulting the people that employ you.
there is a reason people say ACAB, right? There is a reason for that. Like you can make the argument that law enforcement serves just the interest of the state and the wealthy, and they don't care about anybody else, right? And the protesters don't fall into that either of those categories, right? And so, we've already talked about tear gassing, beanbag, shots, tackling people, roughing them up, taking them, throwing them in jail for days. And that's all the events that led Garrett to carrying a gun. He had a handgun, if I remember correctly. Is that correct? Is that what he was carrying?
Garrett?
Yeah.
No, it
Someone.
was a long arm. It was an AK.
Okay, he had an AK. Okay.
And it's the same thing the police were there. I've got a picture of an Austin police officer with the same exact firearm strapped across his chest, the same way Garrett carried his.
Yeah.
Mhm.
July 25th. What was that day like all the way up until?
Um, I feel like the day, like, it started off like as a normal day, like I, in my head, I know they're just small things, but just like getting in the car and like we're getting food before we get there and we're going and people are just like, in front of the awesome police department and they're like, they're on the microphone or the like giving speeches and talking, just that's what they would do in the beginning of the protests. And they'd have different people come and speak up and we were just all gathering and it was and the specific event was in solidarity with Portland because there was a lot of stuff going on in Portland at that time that was related to the Black Lives Matter protests because that's what they were doing too. And so that's how that day began, just with like we all came together and then I remember just we started marching and I remember like I had like asked Garrett like, hey, like the roommate with us at the time, I was like, maybe like our roommate should push me because you're carrying. And that was the one time that Garrett was not pushing me out of all the time of the like that was like the one time. Um, and I just remember us marching through the streets and we're chanting and that's what you do. We're holding up signs and we're doing that. And and I remember, I guess I'm gonna fast forward to a little bit of I guess to the Capitol is what I remember marching to the Capitol and then they were giving more speeches and I remember Garrett coming up and we were all talking and it wasn't like, people say it was a riot or something, but we were all just talking and people were giving speeches and then we were like, okay, let's keep marching. And then we did that. And I remember Garrett being like further behind when like our roommate was pushing me and I was holding a flag and we stopped at the W Hotel and then they came out again and they did the speeches. And I remember that was the last time I had actually talked to Garrett for the very last time. And it just, that it didn't seem like it wasn't like some crazy thing like that people are making it out to be. And I remember marching from the W and then we continued to march um and I guess we get to the 4th and Congress area and I remember like seeing like a car like there's like speeding around like just speeding towards us. Like I remember like just seeing the car looking like it was gonna like it was coming directly at us and like it's like I remember like a jerking or something and everyone was like upset obviously because this car just tried to hit all of us um and I remember like just like having a flag and holding it forward because I was scared and didn't know what to do. And I remember Garrett like coming up, like walking up in front of me because I know I was like on the side of the car and I was like I remember seeing the driver's window and he came up in front of me and I remember him like saying move on and I just remember seeing his back, and him saying move on and then I just heard gunshots, like boom, 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 and him falling over in front of me. And then the car sped off. And then I remember jumping out of my chair, and then there were more shots. And then I just remember being on the ground. And then I remember seeing Garrett on the ground. And then he was just, I remember him just laying there. And I remember trying to scoot to get to him. And it was just a lot of, I don't know. It's hard to describe like that whole night. Um, he was just laying on the ground, and he was just not moving. And I just was holding his leg, and everybody just would, like, I don't know, the cops weren't doing anything, and they were just like yelling at protesters, and it was a lot of chaos happening. And then people like pulled me away from him, and um
They were right there.
yeah, they were right there. And they followed it. They were literally trailing behind us in that march, and they didn't do anything. So
The cops were?
yeah, the cops were trailing behind when we were marching, and they did not do anything.
They didn't even chase the guy when he took off.
No.
Nothing.
Wow.
Who then? All right, so the cops are there. They didn't intervene. They didn't do anything. Did they at least call EMS or
Um
one of the bystanders?
yeah, I remember ambulances being there, like, because there's medics, like they have medics at the protest, that they're the ones trying to um basically hold his like wound, like to stop the bleeding. And they were doing that the whole time. But I had already been pulled away from him. But I remember they're just trying to like get him like compressions and all of that. And I didn't see them put him in the ambulance. So they wouldn't let me over the line. I was sitting on the ground at my chair, and I went to get to him, and they wouldn't let me get to him at all. Um, didn't even know he was on the way to the hospital until, I don't know, all the way it all went, it just didn't make any sense. So I couldn't call anyone because my phone and was in his pocket, and the first person I called was my mom, and I was in the car with other people at the protest that I didn't even know very well. And um I just called my mom, and I remember screaming, just scream. And I was hoping, like, when we got to the hospital, like when I got to the hospital, I remember going in and waiting in like the doors, and we were just sitting there, and they wouldn't let us go up. And I didn't even know that he had passed away by the time like I had gotten to the hospital. And then I remember a lady came out, and I guess she was with the Austin Police Department, and she was like, "Hi," she said her name, and then she was like giving me the news in this way, and she was like, "Oh, like you don't know what happened." I was like, "No," and she just says, he sadly passed away." And apparently and that's how I found out. But I guess everybody I already known. I guess I remember my mom had already known that he had passed away online. And I just like willed myself out of the hospital, and just I just screaming. I don't know. I can't. Yeah.
That's how I found out is Whitney's mom.
Yeah,
She
tell us about that, Sheila, so that Whitney can break.
didn't have my phone number. She didn't have my phone number. She put a message on Facebook saying, "Any relatives of Garrett Foster, call me now." And I called her and I said, "What's up, Patricia?" And she said, "Sheila, Garrett got shot." And I said, "Is he okay?" Because I know lots of people who have been shot and they're okay. And she said, "I don't know." And she said, I'll let you know as soon as I find out." And I said, "Okay." So we got off the phone, and I tried calling Garrett's phone. He didn't answer. I tried calling Whitney's phone. No answer. I called Patricia back and I said, Patricia, neither one of them are answering their phones. I said, I need to know what's going on. And she said, well, here is their roommate's number. And she gave me their roommate's number. And as soon as I called him, he answered the phone. And the only thing that I could hear was Whitney screaming. And so I knew it was bad. And then I was pacing the floor. She gave me the number for the detective that she had talked to. And I called this detective and I said, I'm Garrett Foster's mother and I need to know how my son is doing. And he said, we will let you know as soon as we know. I never heard back from him. Whitney's mom is the one, Patricia, she's the one that called me and told me that Garrett was gone. And I don't want to get all emotional.
Yeah, you can if you need to. This is a safe space. If you want to take a breath, we can change it
I was
up.
on the front porch because while I was pacing the floor, I was calling everybody that loves Garrett that I could think of. And when Patricia called me to let me know that he was gone, I was standing outside in front of the house waiting for my sister to get here. And just as my sister pulled up, that's when I got the call. And I just threw the phone and hit my knees. I collapsed. And my sister just held me.
I can't imagine what that phone call must have been like. I can't imagine what it must have been like to find out over Facebook. I can't. That's horrible. And
My daughter told me that, thank you for that reminder. Anna told me that, Mom, somebody died. They're posting about it on Facebook. Somebody in Austin got shot and died. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, this is not the same person. This is something else. This is not my son.
yeah. And Whitney, I feel sorry for you too, is that the hospital wouldn't let you as his wife go, be with him or update you. It sounds like there were a lot of failings across all of it.
Yeah.
Horribly mishandled.
So you've gotten the word. Go ahead, Brett.
I was just gonna say it's it's these failings that really, I mean, other people might think that they're just little small things or anything, but something similar. We weren't able to see Uzi for 3 weeks. They wouldn't let us, even though he was ours. You know what I'm saying? So it's these small failings, like not telling them and not doing. These people that are in these positions, they don't ever seem to do the right thing by the parents, by the the spouses and everything. And it's these moments that, like you said, they didn't let Whitney in there. That could have been her last moment instead of before. It's all these small things that nobody thinks about that will keep you up at night all the time. And there's no reason why Sheila should have heard, seen on Facebook somebody, you know what I'm saying? It's like something similar happened to us. We're hearing about it, and nobody wants to admit when they're wrong or how they're wrong, or that they did wrong to us. And it's just it's really infuriating, and I feel for y'all so much.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking, and unfortunately, it's not a unique story, like Brett just said. Like, so many parents and spouses and friends find out the same way. And granted, the media is getting better about not just releasing names before family has been told, but that's not always the case. And it's almost heartless the way some family members find out about these tragedies. And the story gets worse. The story gets worse, right? The trial, of this person, we're not going to name them, but this person, is arrested It goes to trial. You want to talk about that, Sheila?
I will first say he was not arrested. He was
Okay.
never arrested until he was found guilty. He roamed free for 3 years. And that night in his police interrogation, what he told the homicide detective was, I didn't want to give him a chance to aim it at me. So they knew that night that it was not self-defense, and they still let him walk.
Yeah.
And the next day, that night, Donald Trump gets on and lies about what happened on his Twitter account. Says Garrett Foster shot 5 times and missed. This guy shot back, killing him instantly. And so all of these extremist Trump supporters who hated the Black Lives Matter movement started lashing out hate on our family almost immediately. The
Right.
very next day, Brian Manley, the chief of police in Austin, got on the news and said, Mr. Foster pointed the weapon directly at him and he fired back in self-defense. Lied. Just blatant lies. And then the Monday following, the president of the Austin Police Association gets on CNN and tells the whole world Garrett got what he deserved.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say
To the
that
video, I don't know if you're aware of the video that Garrett did where he calls people cowards. That's my word, not his. He was talking about people like the ones that had previously tried driving into their crowds.
Yeah.
Those people that were just trying to intimidate them because they didn't like what they were saying. Those are the people Garrett was talking about. They didn't tell you that. They didn't give you any context. They put that video out there and said, this is the guy. And all cocky, saying he fucked around and found out. Sorry for the language, but that's it. Seriously, saying that he got what he deserved. And the following weekend, they had a vigil for Garrett at the corner of 4th and Congress where they had all this donated artwork, beautiful artwork, flowers, candles, this beautiful arrangement that all these people contributed and they brought, and they were all standing there just minding their own business, being quiet, not disrupting any traffic, not doing anything wrong at all. And here come the police on their bicycles to harass them and destroyed every bit of it. 3 years, almost 3 years, we finally got a trial. We sat there for 8 full days of court and 2 days of jury deliberations. They weren't deliberating over whether or not it was premeditated. They knew it was premeditated based on all the evidence. They were deliberating over the aggravated assault charge.
Mhm.
The premeditated murder 1 is the jury verdict. And the very next day, because of Tucker Carlson, Governor Abbott says, oh, I look forward to pardoning him as soon as that hits my desk.
Yeah. Before we
And
talk
as soon
about
as he
Abbott,
said
before we
that-
talk about Abbott,
Okay, sorry.
you got the 8 days of trial. That's got to be hell, right? Because now you're also reliving and you're hearing some of those lies again in the courtroom, right? But the jury doesn't buy the self-defense charge, right? They throw out the stand your ground. They don't buy it. They, as you said, the jury believes it's premeditated, and they hit him with the premeditated murder. The charge that they keep going back and forth on is that aggravated assault, right? Like it's the murder is they know for a fact it's premeditated murder. So the jury finally returns that guilty verdict. How do you feel in that moment?
Relief. I think it was the first time I slept all night long since my son's death. It was just peace.
Is that a bit of justice you feel like that moment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Whitney.
Yeah, Whitney, how did you feel hearing the verdict come back?
I felt the same way. I felt like a weight being lifted. Just it was nice to have that for the short time.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at 11 o'clock at night,
Yeah.
Carlson comes on the air. This is one of the last months that he's actually on the air before he gets booted. But he comes on the air and he makes a comment, something along the lines of, I thought Texas allowed stand your ground. And what is Abbott doing about it? No, go ahead, Sheila. What was that?
What are you doing, Governor Abbott? I thought Texas had strong self-defense laws. This man was clearly defending himself and just goes with his own narrative, not knowing any details of the case. He didn't have a single fact of that trial, and he's just talking to his base, and pandering to his base.
Which isn't surprising. That's what I was going to say earlier, right? Like when Donald Trump, it should be a surprise that the president would get on Twitter and make such outrageous statements about something, right? Like, because when we think about any other president in history, when one of these events has happened, even if they know, like, the people that are in the right and the wrong, it's usually something along the lines, my heart goes out, thoughts and prayers, blah, 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 blah. That's not Donald Trump's response. Tucker Carlson, who had just gotten out of a lawsuit over where the Fox News defense was, any reasonable person knows he lies. That's their defense, right? Of him slandering people and harassing people. So he gets on his show and he does what he always does. He just makes things up and lies. And that does what?
Unleashed more hell onto our family than you can ever imagine. It was horrible.
Because the next morning, Greg Abbott responds to Tucker Carlson and says that he will pardon him when it hits his desk. And he does.
It took a year, but yeah, he did.
Yeah.
It just over a year. I think it was 13 months almost to the date.
Now, did the murderer serve any time during that year? Was he in?
That he was in there for that 13 months. Once that jury announced the verdict and the judge sentenced him, he went straight to jail. And he, I don't know how much time in processing you spend in county jail before you get moved to prison, but once he was moved into prison, and just a year. Yeah. Only spent a year of a 25-year sentence. And the only reason he only got 25 years is because his psychiatrist stood on the stand and told the jury he's got severe PTSD. He was bullied as a child. He's slightly autistic. He only sees the world in black and white. And I think the judge had mercy on him because of those things, because he had been deployed previously, and a 25-year sentence for premeditated murder is a light sentence. He didn't even have to, he served 1/25 of that sentence, but a black man was sentenced to 70 years for spitting on a cop in Texas. And the governor says, oh, he murdered a Black Lives Matter protester? I look forward to pardoning him.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key in that, is that he was at a Black Lives Matter protest, and we've all seen who we all know who Abbott is. He can grandstand for everybody, but had any of the circumstances been different, I honestly think that it truly comes down to, the fact that Garrett and Whitney were at a BLM protest, which, when we're talking about how he pardoned them, what many people don't realize is that when he got convicted, he lost his rights to own a gun. But being pardoned, those rights were, re-enlisted to him. This man who killed Garrett can now have all of his guns back. And if that isn't terrifying to people, knowing that he essentially got away with murder and he's free, what's going to stop him from doing it again?
He should have never had a firearm to begin with, even before, because in 2005, he was charged and pled guilty to domestic assault.
Mhm.
And the Lautenberg Amendment should have kept him from ever having a firearm. But I don't know how they kept that hidden. I didn't see that document until after the pardon. And it's like his attorney lied about this in the courtroom. His attorney flat out told the jury in the closing arguments, my client's never done anything wrong except for an assault charge in 2005 when he was protecting his sister. No, he beat the crap out of her. Closed fists, torso, and head. Cops were called, he was arrested, and he still was able to get a firearm. And I don't know how in the world we're supposed to keep our streets safe if this is allowed.
Yeah, that it's, because of those, like the gun show loophole, I'm sure, there's a lot of different loopholes that people can go through, that we do work tirelessly to try to get closed, because I mean, it's Texas, and that's what, people will say, oh, it's Texas, you can own a gun.
And at the
It's like,
time,
just because we live here. Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say at the time that was 2005, even though they were siblings, that was still probably protected under the boyfriend loophole, because Texas had the boyfriend loophole that says basically if the person you commit domestic violence with and you don't share the same address, you don't have to turn in guns, even if charged with domestic
They
violence.
shared the same address, and it says it on the court documents. Yes.
Yeah, that would have been
He
my
was only
guess.
14. He was
Uh,
18. She was 14. They were on the school bus. Ton of witnesses, and he was still able to get a firearm
yeah,
and
he
still
should-
able to serve in the military.
yeah, he shouldn't have been able to get a firearm. He should have been disqualified by the military, for a lot of other reasons, though, in addition to like the violence, right? Like, he should have been disqualified from both of those things. And the fact that it didn't show up on his record is another failing of the system and how they failed you. And then we're going to reset here in a second, so I don't want to go too deep into this. But after the pardon, we start finding a lot of things out about him, right? Like a lot of things about him, including issues with his military career, right? And the violence charge. So why don't we do a quick reset? Because it is basically 10 o'clock at this point. We're an hour in. And then we can pick right back up with that and kind of move forward and talk about our hate of Abbott and of Ted Cruz and several of the others. And I do have a question I want to ask you specifically, Sheila, at the reset. So let's do the quick reset. So hello, everyone. If you're just joining us, yeah, you can take 2 minutes if you want to while I do the like reset and stuff. So, but hello, everyone who is just joining us. You have tuned in to Stories from the Cold Dead Hands. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow. I am a gun scholar. I study firearms and mental health, as well as the social determinants of gun ownership and gun policy support. To my right is my co-host, Brett. Brett, introduce yourself.
I'm Brett Cross. I'm the father of one of the Robb Elementary massacre victims, Uzziah Garcia. Since that day, we have just been fighting for justice and accountability for Uzziah, and to make sure that he is not a statistic, and to make sure that the failings of the town, the city, the state, federal, that these failings do not continue to happen to other people, because we were failed enormously by everybody. So since then, it's just been a fight, and we are here to continue to tell the stories of the loved ones of people who have been tragically taken, and trying to get justice for them.
Yeah, and so here on the Cold Dead Hands, we are not talking about the people who committed these acts. We are instead talking about the impact that they left on the families that were left behind, and we're talking about the victims themselves. So the first half of the hour, we had talked with our special guests, Sheila Foster and Whitney Mitchell, and we were talking about the events that led up to the loss of Sheila's son and Whitney's husband, Garrett. And we ended talking about how the trial brought relief when the jury returned the verdict, only to have that relief snatched away the next day as Governor Greg Abbott of Texas promised to pardon Garrett's murderer. And, you know, even though it took a little over a year for that to happen, it throws them into turmoil. And so after the pardon happens, right, we start learning a lot of things. And we were talking about that in the last hour, part of that, where he had been convicted of brutally assaulting his sister back in 2005. And there were other things that had started to come out. Sheila, do you want to talk on any of that?
Well, the unsealed motion that was released after the governor's announcement that he was going to pardon this guy was full, 76 pages of hateful, racist rhetoric. And he actually asked his friend, could I do this and call it self-defense? And his friend said, no, we took the same CHL class. You know, you can't do that. That's not a good shoot. His parents tried to talk him down from some of his online rantings against the BLM movement. And he was just extremely disturbed, and it was very obvious.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and what you were talking about there, like several of text messages get released, right? Like after the trial, after the conviction, after the pardon, that show him saying very racist things, right? Like calling Black Americans animals, basically, right? Like referring to them in very racist ways. And you know, the jury didn't see a lot of that. The jury saw portions of that, but not, there was a lot that the jury was not shown because that was deemed not relevant.
Right. I don't know how it's not relevant because it points at the kind of character that you're dealing with. But I mean, they still came out with a guilty murder one verdict,
Yeah.
even not seeing all of this additional stuff.
Which is shocking, right? To me, knowing how the justice system typically works, I was honestly shocked because the defense really played up the fact that he was also a service person. They don't really talk about Garrett's service all that much, but they harp on his to try and paint him as an all-American, right? And then all these things come out. And if I remember correctly, there were some things about his military record that were not good that started to show up, where he had been disciplined.
He had been disciplined. He had been sharing racist memes and racist text messages back and forth with people in his unit. Do you know the Petty Auntie on TikTok?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She is ex-Army, and she was mortified when she saw some of this. She took it to the Army and said, you need to hold these people accountable, these people that were on the receiving end of this stuff, because why didn't they do anything about it?
Yeah. Everybody that was involved in that should have been held accountable. The military code of justice does not allow for any of that, right? Again, another failing, right? Because he could have been court-martialed, dishonorably discharged, and like I don't know that Abbott would have been quick to pardon him if he had been dishonorably discharged, because that would have not been a good look. But Abbott's a racist, and this guy was a racist, and he was honorably discharged. So like Abbott was all on board. How do you feel about, kind of shifting gears a little bit, about the state of Texas politics? I know you have said in other, public statements and your, interviews with media and stuff that you have been a lifelong Republican. How do you feel now?
Oh, no, not anymore. Absolutely not anymore. I don't want to be in the same club with these people that are so blatantly hateful.
Yeah.
I can't imagine reaching out to a grieving parent and seeking them out to send them these hateful, disgusting messages. You would not believe what people have sent me. I'll share it with you. I'll send you some stuff. It's downright.
I mean, you can say it on here. Like,
Oh well, I mean, one guy sent me on Facebook Messenger, sent me a picture of a literal dead body on the ground with his head blown to pieces, and said, "This is what your son would have looked like." And you fucking bitch. All of these, just, it's like, who does this? And no, I will not affiliate myself with those people ever again.
Yeah.
I will never vote for another Republican ever again. Not since prior to 2020 would I ever vote for another Republican. In fact, in 2020, I voted for Jo Jorgensen because Garrett really had such high hopes that she had a chance at winning. And he was a libertarian.
Yeah.
And he was murdered on
I'll be
American
honest
soil.
that libertarians aren't much better, but that's a different discussion for a different night.
I think they have a left-leaning libertarians and right-leaning libertarians. I think they have, it's like the moderate and the extremists.
Yeah.
I know that, like, prior to ours, I wasn't political at all, and I can still say that I'm not very political. Like the politicians have made this political, and I kind of see it. I kind of see it the same way for y'all on the outside, because like you said, these are the same people that you may have previously voted for that are, Abbott pardoned him, and you have people that stand toe to toe with Abbott, and everything that he says is law to these people, and they continue to show up and back it and everything. So I understand like 100% why, like that, your mind would be totally changed, because they don't. It's the same group that says they're for family values and everything like that, except when families are being torn apart, they don't care. So,
Or supporting a man who's had, multiple affairs and multiple wives and all of that, is putting that person forward as the best candidate, right? Like, yeah.
And then claiming to be pro-life, but also be pro-war and pro-killing protesters who stand up for things you don't agree with. They don't care about lives
Right.
after
Well,
they're born.
Right, after they're born, right?
Like,
Because these are the same people that say cut school lunches, get rid of any like safety nets, social safety nets that children have. I mean, especially when you think about some children, that's the only meal they get is at school, right? And then what happens if there's no summer lunches, no other school lunches? What happens to those children?
they don't care.
There's a definite lack of empathy, and you experience this over the course of 4 years, right? You are experiencing this between the issues getting to trial, then everything that happens immediately following the trial. We've talked a lot about Abbott. What was the response of your senators?
No response whatsoever. They kept their mouths shut. I know that, and I can't even tell you the Republicans that, when I say I was a Republican my whole life, it's because my family said vote Republican. And I would literally ignorantly go in there and vote straight ticket, not even care who the candidates were,
Right.
just because that's what I was raised to do, and that I
mean,
never paid attention to politics.
I mean, so I'll have my confession for a minute. Like, I was a Republican up until the leading into the first term for Barack Obama. So, in 2008. And I had been raised, I was a Reagan-esque conservative, right? Like Ronald Reagan, John McCain, those were people that were idolized in my family. And people would say, oh, Republicans are racist. And I was like, no, they're not. But then Barack Obama ran for office, and suddenly I'm seeing something very differently than I had ever seen before. Right. I'm seeing a different side of people I used to respect. And that 2008 election was the first time I ever voted for a Democrat in a presidential election. And I've gone far off the far left end at this point, especially compared to the modern America. So I understand, right? Like, I understand you fall into those traps because your parents and your family and your friends are all voting one way. I mean, I had a falling out with a friend who was like, "You used to believe in conservative principles." And I was like, "Yeah, but I don't believe in racism." And like, I can't get on board with that. And human rights are very important to me. And you begin to see, as you saw, there is a severe lack of empathy from one side. Right. We can argue all night about how much empathy is on the other, but there is one side that is devoid of empathy. And that can cause shattering changes in us, right? Like, I know you must have experienced a lot of ups and downs as you kind of grapple with this, because that is part of our identity too, right? Like, how you vote, it's kind of like a team sport kind of thing, right? Like, we identify. And now suddenly that's also gone. Like, everything has become unstable for you. How did you cope?
I don't think I have yet. I think I'm still in the process of coping. What do you mean? How did I cope with the crumbling of the Republican?
Crumbling of everything, because every structure that you had is crumbling at this point. You're trusting your trust in the police department, your trust in the system, your trust in your party. Everything is falling apart. How did you cope? How did you get up each morning to continue your fight?
Garrett's worth it. He's worth it. And what he was doing out there is worth defending and worth screaming from the rooftops. And I've got to tell you, and I said it on the stand in court, it's one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't listen to my son more when he was here. But I sure as hell hear him now. I'm seeing all the same stuff that he saw. And it's horrible that it almost takes something happening to you in order to make you wake up. But I think a lot of people are walking around asleep and not really seeing all of the miscarriage of justice and the overreach of power. But I have to tell you, I'm so proud of some of the people in my life, family, they've all come around now and said, Greg Abbott needs to go. He needs to be impeached. They will never vote for him again. Yeah. If my bird was running against Greg Abbott, I would vote for Frodo. I'm not even joking. Whoever's going to get out of that office, that's who I'm voting for.
I mean, that's how I feel about DeSantis, so I get it. But what you were saying, though, I want to touch on that real quick, because that gets at the intersections of race and privilege. That as a white man, if something doesn't personally affect me, I probably don't have empathy for it. We see that over and over when you see politicians who are like Republican white men that are anti-LGBTQ until one of their family members comes out, or anti-gun control until one of their, like Ronald Reagan, I will argue until my dying day, is the most prominent politician for gun control, but he didn't take on that stance until someone tried to assassinate him. Right? He was very much, he was the first person the NRA ever endorsed until it personally affected him. Same with people like Dick Cheney and John McCain. They were very much, in their boxes as against any kind of civil right until things started to affect them personally. And unfortunately, for those with the highest level of privilege, that is often how it is. It's not until we experience it personally that we begin to take a vested interest in change.
That's why Garrett was out there. That's why he was out there, is because when he fell in love with a Black woman, he started seeing, it started spending all of his time with her and started seeing the way people treated him, the way they look at him was different now. He was on the receiving end of this systemic racism that has never died in this country. It's always been, and it's always just, it's never gone away. I don't think people realize that.
And Whitney could probably speak on it a lot better than the rest of us, but it's always here. It's been here. The question is that it was coded and it was implicit for decades, right? We look at people like Reagan's speechwriter. Now I'm blanking on his name. But he has, made the comment that you can't say the N word anymore because that'll hurt you. So instead you talk about cutting taxes, but the outcome is that Black people get hurt more than white people, right? And maybe people know that, maybe they don't, but it's so coded that you can say you're not talking about race anymore, right? And so we have that mentality, right? This hidden coded language, but people who are marginalized always see that, right? They've seen it. We might not see it because we're not affected by it, but people who are marginalized do. Whitney, do you want to add on to that at all?
I mean, I was going to these protests and Garrett was going to these protests because this has just been my experience my whole life. And, my family's experienced their whole lives, and people want to pretend like it's so long ago, when it's like my grandmother is still alive and was living in the Jim Crow era. And I it's hard to talk about a lot of the time, but I just feel like it's white supremacy, and it's doing what it was designed to do.
Yeah,
So
100%, 100%. And Jim Crow's not over, right?
yeah.
I don't think that's something that people understand, right? We don't call it redlining anymore, but redlining still happens. And for those listeners that don't know what redlining is, that's where banks pick certain neighborhoods that they would charge higher loans to people living in those neighborhoods. And those people tended to be Black and brown people. And so you basically couldn't get loans in those neighborhoods. And today, banks like Wells Fargo have been gotten in trouble, I think 8, 9 times in the last 10 years for charging higher interest rate mortgages to equally stratified Black and brown citizens than they do their white ones who are trying to buy homes. So that means that the white people can move out of the poorer neighborhoods because they get a lower interest rate loan, even though they make the same money, they have the same credit score, everything, as the Black and brown home buyers. They also got in trouble for selling cars to Black and Hispanic car buyers and then adding on an insurance policy that they didn't tell them about. And then they repossessed the car and damaged their credit when they didn't pay the insurance policy, right? Those kinds of things are systemic racism. Like, I don't experience that as a white man in America. I don't see that because it doesn't happen to me personally. But that was the point of like the Black Lives Matter, is that this country doesn't treat Black and brown and indigenous people like they matter.
What is that statistic? I think it's Black men are 3 times more likely to be killed by police.
Yeah, it's about 3 times higher. The rate is about 3 times more. So they make up about 27% of the people who are killed by law enforcement, but make up only about 9, 10% of the population. So
Right.
it's about 3 times. Mm-hmm.
And that's what my son, that's why he was out there, is he was trying to fight all of this. He was trying to raise awareness. And I wish I could go back and have these conversations with him now, because I see it now. I see it crystal clear. And before, it's like I was wearing blinders or something. I'm not sure if I was just trying to, I don't know, white supremacy, racism just inbred into me. I'm not sure.
Right. Well, we are raised in it and we benefit from it, right? Like, we don't experience race, right? People don't look at us and try and put us in a box when they see us, right? We get to identify as, I'm Irish Scottish, right? Like, I get to identify how I choose. So I'll tell a story. So like, there was a research project done back in the late 70s. And during this, one of the people that was interviewed was a woman who, every time she was talking to people, she was a proud German woman, very proud. She talked about that heritage until the day she had to have lunch with Holocaust survivors. That day she was Polish, right? And that kind of explains the white experience, because I can be Irish on St. Patrick's Day. I can go out, I can get shit-faced drunk, I can have a party, I can do whatever I want. And then on March 18th, I can put that in a closet and it's like it never happened, and I won't be viewed from that same lens, right? That's what, when we say white privilege, that's what we're talking about, right? Like, is I'm not viewed with suspicion, hostility, or I think the best way is to say there's no distrust, right? I'm always given the benefit of the doubt. But that isn't the experience for people who are, born with darker shades and more melanin in their skin. And that Garrett was working to try and end those systems of oppression makes this even more of a tragedy.
Mhm.
He would have been a huge difference maker. I believe that. I think he would have made a huge difference.
I think that he still is. I try to think that same way about, with Uzziah, he wanted to be a cop so that he could help people, because that's, as a 10-year-old, that's what he saw and everything. And so, I try to think that he still is through me. And I think, that Garrett still is through you and through Whitney, because y'all haven't stopped telling his story. Y'all haven't stopped fighting these injustices. I mean, he was literally killed at a Black Lives Matter protest, and y'all are still fighting this. So I truly think that he will make the difference, albeit in a different way that we all want him to. But through y'all, I absolutely believe that he will still make that difference that he died trying to make.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he was doing the work. He was actually out there doing the work, and he was doing it because he knew it was the right thing, right? He wasn't doing it to get praise or get his name in a newspaper or to make a video for TikTok, right? Like he was doing
Can
it
I say,
the right thing. Yeah, go ahead.
I did not even find out that they were feeding the unhoused community until after Garrett's death. It's not something that he called to brag about. He didn't call home to tell me. And he had that desire at 10 years old. He called me upstairs to watch the news because there was a food pantry in Plano that was being shut down. They couldn't afford to pay their bills and they were running out of food. And the people that ran the place, that was their job. That's all they did, is open the doors and gave food to anyone who was hungry. There was no criteria. And at 10 years old, that bothered him so bad. He called me upstairs and said, "Mom, look." And we were able to keep that place open. And it was because of Garrett. And he kept that. I mean, and it's not something that he was bragging about, trying to get credit for or anything like that. It's just, he thought this is what you're supposed to do as a human being. You're
Yeah.
supposed to love each other and care for each other.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, and I won't speak for anybody else on this panel, but like I personally, anytime I see like a TikTok video or some YouTube video of somebody like going out and showing themselves, giving money or food or something to a homeless community or a person in need, immediately I am distrustful of that person, because I know that if they weren't getting the fame, if they weren't having the cameras on them, if they weren't getting the praise, they wouldn't do it otherwise. They're only doing it for those.
Hey, look at me, look what I'm doing, look how
Yeah.
good I am. Yeah.
See how good a person I am. Because if you really care about communities, you don't have to brag about it. You don't have to make videos about it showing that you're doing these things, right? No one will ever know the charity work that I do, because it's nobody's business. If you're not with me doing it, you don't need to know about it, right? And so that's another, I think, reason to applaud Garrett, right? That he was someone who genuinely cared, and he was doing it because it's the right thing, not because people would praise him for it.
And those are the difference makers. Like I said, I really feel like he is making a difference still to this day. Like I said, through y'all, but man, it's just, I don't get emotional very often. Um, yeah, sorry.
It's okay. Like you can go sit down with that toaster in a little bit, Brett, and
I plan on it. Take that bath. Yeah, absolutely.
take that bath of
I don't
laughter.
know what y'all are
Bath.
referring to, but I don't think I don't think bathtubs and toasters belong in the same sentence.
So long running joke between Brett and I is we have to figure out how to put a toaster bath joke into every episode because dark humor is the only way he and I cope with the things that we do and
Yeah,
deal with. I don't know if Sheila, if you and Whitney are the same. Dealing with the amount of tragedies that I have seen and had to talk on, dark humor helps me. Brett's the same way.
absolutely. Absolutely. I did want to ask though, because I know like in our situation, the media has been really, really good help for us. But in the very beginning for us, it was a total nightmare. People were camping outside of our houses. People were in our backyard, trying to get pictures and videos and everything. And I was kind of curious on because this is, such a huge story, how the media was for y'all. So like I said, I have some really good friendships with some of the people that um in the media, but I also had somebody one time tell me he was like, did this bullshit like, oh, I'm sorry for your loss. And I'm like, well, if you were, you get these cameras out of our face. And he goes, hey man, don't blame me. I didn't pull the trigger. And this was a media personality, so I've had really a hatred for the media, but with our case, we've only found some stuff out because of the media. So like, there's a real love hate with me for it, and I was just wondering how that has been for y'all.
Whitney, you want to go? You've been quiet for a little while.
Uh, I I don't know. I feel like I've because of the media and because I'm, in Austin and the last 4 years, I've encountered like a lot of people who I think like, like I want to help you. I want to be your friend. I want to be there for you, but they're really only around so that they can get something from me or wanted me to do something for them with some type of like media type of thing, but it's like on a smaller scale. Like I've had some really bad just encounters in Austin because of the media and just mostly the online backlash, just receiving horrible messages that are still happening even now. So I wouldn't say, like I don't really like the media, so I don't to me I don't think it's been helpful in any way in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And after we're off air, I want to ask you if you had the same trouble with one of the Austin people that we all had trouble with. They released the footage of our shooter in the hallway, like I think it was like 3 days before the families were going to get to see it without any audio. He got a hold of it and shared it to the whole world. So after this is over, I want to see if we had problems with the same people because yeah, fuck that guy.
Yeah. I-
I remember being bombarded initially with calls immediately. I don't know how they got my number, but we were bombarded with news media for a couple of months. And then it all just went away. They were just gone. And I remember being very disappointed in the people that I did take the time to talk to. We would have a 35 minute conversation, and then they would tell 2 minutes of a story, and it wasn't what I wanted them to say. It wasn't the focus that I was going for by talking to them to begin with. And that was very disappointing.
Yeah, and
And
that's
then the blatant lies is what is getting me every day. We're still having to deal with the lies. They just lie.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons too that me and Ben wanted to do this because and we talked about this in the very beginning. You do, like you said, you do a 30-45 minute interview and they clip it down to 2-minute bullet points, and they can turn you into somebody that you're completely not. I've had it happen to me where I've, done big long stories, 90% about Uzi. And then when I say, federally, I'm asking for an assault rifle ban federally, that's all they put. And, everything else be damned, but the media will create their own narrative. And it's truly frustrating. That's why, on here, we don't want to interrupt, and we like letting people tell their stories because, as you know, you don't get to tell your story very often in its entirety because you're worried that it'll get clipped down to 30 seconds of you. Earlier you just said they're fucking cowards, and then that's what they would clip, and we don't want that at all. So that's one of the main reasons as well that we did this, because we've experienced that as well, and it's fucking frustrating as hell.
And they use it to demonize my son, and it's like, why are you lying about somebody as good as Garrett? Do you have any idea how good he was his whole life? For 28 years, he was a good person, genuinely a good person, way better than I've ever been in my life. He surpassed me in every area. And to see people talking badly about him, it breaks my mama heart because they don't know him. And how can you say these things? You're just pulling shit out of the air, saying whatever you want to try to make him look bad to fit your agenda. It's infuriating, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I call that the Alex Jones effect, though, right? Because, he started that back with Sandy Hook, this idea that, oh, it's false flags. Oh, it's, it's made up. It's not real. And, having to paint adult victims as being responsible for it, right? And saying that children didn't exist. And that's something that Brett has had to deal with Uzi. So.
Oh yeah, I've had people tell me, well, if he's really dead, show me his body. Like, I've had people tell me that he deserved it, that I'm the reason that, that all these terrible things. And what people don't know is that, I'll run my mouth back. I'll talk my shit and everything. But I mean, it does hurt. Like, just seeing that, it takes your breath away. And people don't understand that, we don't get to live a normal life anymore. When you lose a part of your soul, you don't get to live a normal life. Me and my wife, we call it the new normal, because we're never going back to the people that we were before, and you're not ever going to go back to the person that you were before. And we just have to continue to just, for me, I wake up every morning and the first 5 seconds, I'm like, fuck, I woke up, because it's just that hard. But we continue to get up and fight for our children. And then you have people that, whether they're just evil pieces of shit or they're just trying to say shit for shock value or anything, will say the most horrendous things, knowing that it'll affect you. And it does hurt.
Yeah. And I mean, and that is something that's kind of, across the board. I mean, think about how Marjorie Taylor Greene like berated David Hogg when she saw him, right? Like, and when Brett started going live on TikTok at the beginning, when he first started going live, there would be so many people who would come into the comments and say some of the most horrible, atrocious shit, things like your child deserved it, right? Like those kinds of things. They deserved it so that I can keep my guns, right? Like, that was always the sentiment. But that goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier about empathy, right? And this lack of empathy, which kind of leads me to our next jumping off for our next, for our last few minutes together. What can we do, Sheila, Whitney? What can we do that can prevent, these kinds of tragedies, that can help spread the messages that Garrett died for.
Just please keep talking about it, spread awareness. And to anybody who lives in Texas, write your House reps. Write your House reps, because they're the ones that can make a difference. They really are. They can also impeach the governor. That's my goal now. Is he does not deserve that governor seat. He should not be in a position of power if he's going to be overreaching like this and saying, oh, you know what? I don't care about the jury. Those career state prosecutors are corrupt. The DA is rogue, whatever he says about the Travis County DA all the time. That DA is a good man. I have talked to him face to face in person multiple times. He is a good man with a good heart. And he's just trying to do the right thing. And he's being demonized and dragged through the mud because he's prosecuting corrupt cops. And he should be. You shouldn't get to have qualified immunity at all. And if you took an oath to protect and serve your community, when you are assaulting people, that it goes against the oaths that you took. If you're being apathetic to people who are being assaulted, that goes against the oaths that you took. My father actually knows a man who was chief of police at the time. And when the Black Lives Matter protests rolled through this town, he said, I will march with you. I will stand with you. I don't like police brutality either. And this is a cop saying this. And if the good cops would stop the bad cops, it would actually put a stop to all this crap. Sorry, I will go off on a rant with all of that.
No. I mean, that's a good kind of point, right? Like the idea that maybe let's just say maybe only a handful of cops are bad, but if no one who is good will come forward to stop it, does that matter? Right? Does it even matter that there's only a few? Because now all of you are, because you're all perpetuating it. And for those listeners that may not know what qualified immunity is, that is the concept that law enforcement cannot be held accountable or responsible for any crimes or damages committed while in the lawful execution of their duties. The problem, though, is that it pretty much extends to any time that they are on the clock, no matter what they are doing, whether it's in the, they're actually trying to do something or not, which is why, for those of you who have ever been in an accident with a law enforcement officer, even if they didn't have their lights on, you're the one that gets the ticket, not the cop, even if they hit you. And so, like, I can understand why it came about, right? Like, you didn't want someone trying to rescue a hostage situation, right? And damaging something in someone's house to get that person out safely, right? You didn't want that cop sued. But the problem has become that now it's used to hide bad behavior. It's used to protect bad cops.
Murderers.
Yeah,
they're murderers. And they're just being able to say, oh, I was at work.
Yeah.
you also got
to do that because that's my job.
Yep.
Right. What was that, Whitney?
Oh no, I was agreeing.
Yeah, and
I don't
also
know
with
if
the
y'all are aware.
no, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think we're sharing headspace because every time I open my mouth, so do you, and vice versa.
It's bereaved,
I'm not
pissed
trying to
off
be rude.
parents.
I don't know if y'all are aware of Michael Ramos in that case in Austin. It happened a month before George Floyd's death. And that man, a Black Hispanic man, apartment complex, parking lot, somebody called the police and said he was doing drugs in his car. They show up, they're across the street, told him to get out of the car. He did. Told him to lift his shirt. He did. Told him to raise his hands. He did. Yeah. They fired a rubber bullet at him. So he got back in his car because he was terrified and started driving away, and they killed him through the car door and got away with it. That's 1 month before that freaking monster kneeled on George Floyd's neck for what, 9 minutes?
Yeah,
How long was that?
if we sat here and listed all of those kind of events, we'd be here all night because we could talk about Philando Castile, Tamir Rice. We could talk about Breonna Taylor. I mean, there are so many. Jerome Robertson was one of my favorites to use, right? Especially going back to the idea of the good guy with the gun. If you don't know who Jerome Robinson was, he was a nightclub security guard. He stopped a mass shooting. He stopped it. Cops showed up and shot and killed him. And the NRA, of course, is silent the entire time, because it's a black man with a gun. They're like, let the facts come out. And then it turns out that he didn't have a permit for his concealed carry. And the NRA is like, see, he's illegally having a gun. When that would have been the perfect example for the NRA to stand up. See, look, the good guy with the gun stopped the bad guy. And they could have come out against the law enforcement, but they didn't. They didn't. And even though people were running from the nightclub screaming, this man saved my life, the cops shot and killed Jerome Robinson at the door.
I don't know how many people told me after Garrett died that he saved their lives that night. There was one girl who said the only thing standing between me and that man's bullets was Garrett Foster. And if you look at his text messages, I think he probably had an intention of hurting a lot more people than just one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's kind of obvious, right? Which is, again, why I think talking about it this way, I think at one point, maybe that'll be something that makes change, because if we're not giving notoriety, if we're not giving infamy to the people who commit these acts, then they're going to find some other way to get infamy or notoriety that's going to put them in the papers and the news media, on social media. If they're not getting it anymore through mass shootings and attacks, then maybe that'll save lives. I don't know. But Whitney, you want to weigh in on any of that?
I've just been listening. Sorry, I feel like when I talk about everything, I start to kind of get a bit dissociated, so I apologize.
It's okay.
No need to apologize.
Yeah, you don't have to apologize for anything. We would just love your thoughts.
I feel like all I want to say is, like, I want to be able to keep sharing what happened, and like I don't know, I don't have very much faith in the system, to be honest. So that's all I can really say is, like, can try to keep sharing Garrett's story, and so people are just aware of what happened, because it affects other protests that are going and other people in this, and I feel like it's going to happen again to someone else. And
the governor just empowered that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what the governor empowered, whether he realizes it or not, right? He just made it a political statement that if someone has a gun and that person scares you, you can legally kill them, right? Even though that gun is holstered and open carry is legally allowed in the state of Texas, I can see a situation where there's, something happens and the person immediately, that's their defense. And they're like, and they pull up this case as the, precedent, right? And we can say, oh, it'll only work if it's politically aligns, but that's not how courts work, right? Like, if it can be successfully argued at one time, that's all it takes to make precedent that it was successfully argued, and what kind of Pandora's box has Greg Abbott actually created with this action?
I actually did a video about it on TikTok and said, basically what he just did is open the door for copycats to do the same thing. And I want to know what he's going to do when this happens at a Trump rally. Mm-hmm. What if somebody drives through a red light into those people and guns one of them down? Is he going to pardon that person?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, but I don't even know that it might even make it that far, right? Because if all that person has to do in their defense is say in court that they were scared and that, like this case, Abbott's already proven that if you're scared, that's all it takes, right? And if
Yep.
the defense attorney can spend that.
Yeah. Yeah. What is he saying when he says, you can do this? You can break the law by accelerating through a red light into a crowd of pedestrians, see somebody's firearm, say, I was afraid for my life, and take somebody's life and walk. It's like absurd.
Yeah, so Brett posted, if y'all can put your social medias, write them down so that we can make sure that people see it. And if you want to tell us, right, like on here, what your like TikTok handles are, I think that's what the majority of the people who may be listening to this, where they come from.
At Frodo the Freak
Okay.
is my TikTok handle. And Whitney.
My TikTok is at PunkyBabe2010.
Is it? I thought yours was Street Fairy.
I think that's the username, my new
Oh,
username.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll make sure when I post this on clips from this, because I'll take clips out and put on TikTok, to put both of your usernames. So
Yeah, because I've I mean, I watch your videos constantly because you, just like I, are continuing to tell our children's stories. So which is very important. You know, a lot of people ask, what can we do? One of the main things is just listen and pay attention. And I think that that is often overlooked.
Right. Have you gotten hate on TikTok too? Do people comment on your videos and say horrible things?
Oh, absolutely. I had a there's a school shooter that's on TikTok. Um and
I know who it is, I believe.
Yep. And I got into one of his lives and was, you know, pretty much told him off and everything. And all of his almost 300,000 followers came and mass reported and said just evil, vile shit. So yeah, I get hate everywhere all the time.
well, doesn't John follow both of us?
Yeah, and that was the disgusting thing too. He followed me, knowing that man shot up a school as a teenager. And here's the thing, and this, you know, even correlates here, because if you're going to act like white supremacy is not a thing, just listen to this. This guy shot up his school and did time. I cannot remember off the top of my head because he pisses me off that much. But when he got out, he got attacked by a black man with a sword. He did less time than that man did, and he shot up a school.
Dear God.
And then still continues to, you know, be like, oh, my victims, and like a owning thing. I could go off on this dude forever, but you know, bottom line is that he was attacked by somebody, and yes, that man should do time for attacking somebody with a sword. Absolutely. But how are you, just because of the color of his skin, going to give him more time than the white kid that literally shot up a school, terrorizing his school? Like, and that just goes into, you know, like I said, what we've been talking about today is that a lot of people want to say that, you know, there isn't, you know, systemic racism, and you can see it anywhere. Just turn on the news and you'll see it. You'll see a white man killed at a BLM protest and everything, and our governor, you know, pardons his killer and essentially tells y'all the same thing that he told us. Well, it could have been worse.
Yeah.
You know, because Abbott told us that.
Well, I mean, Trump, after the shooting, Trump told people just to get over it.
Yeah.
Right. Like,
And that's their thought process.
Brett, Sheila, Whitney, how do you get over this? How do you just get over it?
You don't ever get over it, and you don't ever say, well, it could have been worse. I cannot believe he said that to a bunch of grieving parents. And it just, I swear, when I picture Greg Abbott, I'm not a very nice person.
Same.
The thoughts that go through my mind are like Khaleesi on Game of Thrones. I just called Dracarys and just.
Yeah, he's a terrible person, and it's almost like he's like, you think I'm bad now? Just wait for the next thing that I do, because like in ours, he wanted to be like, oh, it's not the guns, it's not the guns, yada yada yada. It's mental health. Well, in April before our shooting, he cut $211 million from the Health and Human Services, which is our mental health, and then he sends it to the National Guard for Operation Lone Star, which in and of itself is fucking racist, And so he just shows you over and over and over. And this is the type of person that he is that there has been a mass shooting under Abbott every year, except for in 2020 and 2021, which is when the world was shut down. And if that doesn't tell you that he's fine with it, he literally thinks it could be worse. And if you're a person of, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. With our shooting, it is so messed up, because had it been 17 white kids, do you think he would have just told us it would have been worse? There were 17 brown kids, the majority, the 2 teachers, brown. This is a Hispanic community. That is why he told us it could be worse.
Right.
Somebody like that does not belong in a position of power.
Absolutely not.
All right, we're getting close to the end of our time together. Let's do some final thoughts. We'll start with our guests. We've got about 8 minutes, I'll say, so roughly 2 minutes each if you want to talk. We'll start with you, Sheila.
Can Whitney go first?
Yeah, Whitney, absolutely. Whitney, give us your final thoughts.
I've always said this, and like, I just want people to realize that they're like, it's not like a headline that you click or just something that you like, just like, it's not like, it just seems like people view it as like an entertainment type thing, or just like a headline click and then just like forget about it. But there are humans, like, they're people that are grieving, the people that they've lost to gun violence, and are like the situations that we're talking about today. And I just want people to realize that. And I feel like I've tried to say that before, but it's always been cut off completely. But yeah, I feel like that's not a lot to ask. So yeah, just thank you for allowing me to talk today, because I don't do this often, because I'm not used to giving me a platform to speak. So thank you.
Well, yeah, I'm happy to have you. I know Brett is too. And I will see you again tomorrow night, as I'm one of the co-hosts of that panel you'll be on. So thank you for coming, and you are always welcome back here, Whitney.
Yeah, thank you.
Sheila?
I love you.
I love you too.
And thank you also from me. I appreciate the space that you give us, to a safe space, to talk about the things that are important to us and the things that are important to Garrett, and the ability to humanize him to a world that, like Whitney said, is a name on a headline, and most of the time it's not even his name on a headline. It's BLM protester. They can't even say Garrett Foster. And that makes me angry as his mother. I wish people would use his name and just say who he is, who he was, what he stood for. So I appreciate you giving us this opportunity. Thank you very much.
And you are also welcome back anytime, any of my spaces, Sheila. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Brett.
First things first, I honestly really do think that we're going to need a part 2 of this, because there's so much more shit on Abbott that we can talk about for else. But aside from that, you said something very important. Say his name. that is something that, you know, we try to say all the time. Remember his name, remember his life, remember his face, because, you know, I wrote this down earlier when at the very beginning. I mean, this was, his life was almost like a movie, like a Lifetime movie, this true passionate love. I mean, and just doing all the right things is something that can't be replicated. And it's just, we will continue to say his name, and I will continue to stand with y'all. I know Ben will too. I can speak for him on that. But yes, absolutely. You know, back to what Whitney said, y'all will always have a space to talk and to say what you need to say, because we do know how the media is, and we want everybody's stories really being told. And to end my last few seconds here, thank you all so much for just having the strength to get up today. I know how fucking hard it is. And it's impressive as hell every day that you're able to get up and continue to fight. And final note is fuck Greg Abbott.
I mean, yeah, I want to echo a lot of what Brett said before we sign off. First, I do agree. I do think there is a lot more to explore here. And at some point in the future, when you or Whitney or both are free, I would love for you both to come back and we can continue having a conversation about the state of politics in Texas with gun laws, with things like that. Real, you know, like getting into, I know that they're trying to get the Texas Supreme Court to kind of like overturn that pardon.
They denied it.
They denied it. Yeah, I hadn't seen the news. I was going to ask, but I didn't have much hope for that, right? Like, but looking at how things could change to maybe like make some changes on that. But I do think that there is a lot more we can talk about. I think that there's a lot more that's not been said. And so, yeah, I would love to have you come back. As for my final thoughts, I think it's important to honor the people we've lost. I think it is important to tell their stories and say their names over and over and over, because Garrett Foster was a good person and deserves to be remembered. And it sucks. And I say this about Brett all the time. Sheila, I'm happy to know you. Whitney, I'm happy to meet you tonight. I am happy to know you both, but I shouldn't have to know you. Right. I see it from a different lens. I don't have a personal connection other than through all of you. Right. Like I deal with it from that aspect. I get the phone calls from the media, like this event happened. What are your thoughts? Right. Like that is my connection to all of this. But through that, I get to meet a lot of wonderful people that I'm like. Brett is one of my best friends, but I shouldn't know Brett. I should have never met Brett. That I shouldn't live in a country where my job even exists. There should not be any such thing as a gun researcher. That should not happen. And yet here I am, right? And I'm connected to all of you through tragedy, through turmoil, and through just not people wanting to give up their hobbies because they want to be selfishly keeping their guns instead of keeping people safe. So that's where I'll end that. And otherwise, I think that's going to be the end of the show. So this has been the stories from the Cold Dead Hands. I'm Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow. This is my co-host, Brett Cross. Hopefully, we will find a day where there will be no more stories to tell. But until that day arrives, we'll see you next week. Signing off.
Thank you.
This has been Stories from the Cold Dead Hands with Dr. Benjamin Dowd-Arrow and Brett Cross. Hopefully one day we will not have any stories to tell. But until that day arrives, remember to love one another and be kind to each other. Until next week, signing off.